Perfect. So, hey, listen, there's a story that Jesus told, and I guarantee you've heard it. Like, there's nobody in here that hasn't heard it, but we need to talk about it anyway, even though you've heard it. And the story goes like this. One day, two men went to the temple to pray. There was a Pharisee, and there was a tax collector. At the temple, both of them approached God, and they both did so the way that they believed they should. And the Pharisee offered a prayer to God of thanksgiving and gratitude. He said to God, thank you that I'm not like other people. I'm not a cheater. I'm not an adulterer. I'm not really a sinner of any kind. I tithe, I give, I do good things all the time, and I am not like other people, including this tax collector over here. The tax collector, as it turns out, offered simply the prayer to God of, have mercy on me, for I am a sinner. And Jesus said at the end of that story, he said, or at the end of the very quick little episode, that it wasn't both men that went home justified in the eyes of God, but it was only the tax collector who went home justified in the eyes of God. Now, again, this is one of those stories that you guys have undoubtedly heard if you've been around for more than a few months, and this is a story is one of those that if I go, I keep a list on my computer of all the verses I use in every sermon going back 17 years, because I want to see what I'm repeating, what I'm not repeating, what I'm doing. And this is one of those where I type in Luke 18, 9 through 14, and 11 things pop up. Because I just keep referencing this. Almost yearly, I reference this. This is just a really thing. And the reason I do is because as Christians, this is one of those stories that kind of encapsulates the whole gospel, right? We believe that people are saved not through their own good works, not through their ability to perform, not through their ability to be religious, not through being good people at all, but that we are saved by grace through our faith, meaning it is all a gift of God. And so we are used to stories about bad people being saved. We are used to, for example, the guy who writes most of the New Testament being a former Pharisee who had killed people in the church. We are all we were born into a world where a murderer is an apostle, and we're just oh, okay. And so we're used to this is what the gospel is. And at the same time, we're used to the fact that Jesus is very comfortable criticizing religious people. We're used to the idea that the religious establishment of the day, who, by the way, killed Jesus, who, by the way, sold him to Rome, who, by the way, all of that, everything. Look, at the end of the day, we're used to this being a thing that happens. And so Jesus is looking at people that are good people, supposedly, and saying not quite, and people who are bad people and saying not quite. We are used to this. And so this story is one of these things that really kind of encapsulates what the gospel is all about in just one little exchange. And that's good, but it's also kind of a problem. And here's why that's a problem. It means that almost no one in this room ever, if I would guess no one in this room, but maybe, we have never actually felt the emotions that Jesus was trying to elicit from his audience. We have never felt what this story actually is, which is completely and utterly outrageous. Completely and utterly scandalous. This is the opposite of what ancient people think. It's kind of like this. You know that Darth Vader is Luke Skywalker's dad, right? We all know that. Nobody in here is surprised. I'm really sorry if I spoiled a movie from 1980 for some of you. I'm so sorry. But look, we know that Luke Skywalker is the son of Darth Vader. We've known that for 45 years now. Is that right? That can't be. Can we just take a moment of silence right now for all of our lives that are passing before us rapidly? But look, we all know that. So now when somebody mentions it, it's not oh my goodness, what do you mean? But back in the day when they filmed this thing, they kept it a secret even from the actors. Even the actors don't know what's coming. because they wanted it to be so shocking. Like, they wanted you to leave the theater and say, what did I just watch? This story is Jesus revealing that Darth Vader is Luke's father. He wants you to leave the sermon just shocked at the notion that a terrible person like a tax collector, a traitor to God's people, someone who sold their soul for cash, someone who is against the nation of Israel, is somehow the good guy in a story with a religious leader involved, who's the bad guy. Because here's what we need to understand, okay? That prayer that the bad guy prays isn't wrong. When the Pharisee says, like, I'm not like other people, well, he wasn't. I'm glad I'm not like the tax collector. Well, we should all be glad of that too. We should be glad that there are people in this world that do have some morals. Like, I'm sorry, it's the way the story, like, it's the way it is. He says, I'm not an adulterer. What would the world look like if no one was faithful to their spouse? Like, I don't cheat people. What would the world look like if there was no one you could turn to that you could, with a handshake, trust? What would the world look like if everyone was just out for themselves? If no one was loyal to their nation or their religion or their family or their people? It would be complete, utter chaos if everyone's a tax collector, right? So when we hear Pharisee, we hear guy who killed Jesus. When they heard Pharisee, they heard person to emulate and look up to because they're doing it right. There is nothing in this parable that tells us that the Pharisee is not what exactly he claims to be. And this notion that we should somehow want to be a tax collector is completely and utterly ludicrous. So for Jesus, under those circumstances, to say, hey, actually, it's the tax collector who's the good guy, who goes away justified by God, it is shocking. And we have such a hard time feeling that. We can't feel that. We can't be shocked by it. We can't be disturbed by that. But luckily, there's another part of the story I think is a little bit distressing, if nothing else. Maybe not shocking, but distressing that we should talk about. You see, we can't feel what Jesus wanted them to feel, but we can maybe feel this. I think people have lied to you. And I think I'm people. And this is an apology. See, I don't want Jamie to pray all the time. Not because Jamie doesn't do a good job of praying all the time, but because she prays a lot and somebody else should. And so we always try to get people to like pray in front of to do a closing prayer or what. We always want people to pray. And so what happens every time we try to get somebody to pray, we're like, hey, you should pray. And that person's like, oh, I'm nervous. What if I do it wrong? And I say, you can't do it wrong. Just pray whatever's in your heart. We've all heard this, right? Yeah, that's not true, as it turns out. See, this story, I know nobody's ever going to pray on stage ever again. I'm so sorry, Jamie. Like, you're stuck with it forever. I know, now that I've said that, I've lied to everybody. Look, this story is entirely predicated on the concept that there are good prayers and there are bad prayers. That you can pray correctly and you can pray incorrectly. Because the only thing we know about these two gentlemen in this story are what they prayed. And Jesus, judging by what they prayed, is very comfortable saying one of them is not justified and one of them is. Which means their prayers were not equal. And see, we always say they are because we're trying to, be encouraging. And I get it. I'm the world's worst prayer. It's weird to be a preacher, but the job is preacher, not prayer. Okay? Not great at praying. I'm not, but in front of people especially. But this story actually teaches us this. There are good prayers to pray and there are bad prayers to pray. And that's alarming, particularly in a world where we have all told each other, just pray how you feel. Just pray whatever you want to pray. can be alarming to realize that, like, I could be praying completely incorrectly. I could be doing this wrong, and it is actively harming both my relationship with God, but my relationship with other people. Because again, in this story, this Pharisee and this tax collector is not like they're buddies. There's something in that prayer that's a problem, and we should probably talk about it. But we need to understand before we talk about it that there is, in fact, a concept of a prayer we want to be praying and a prayer that we don't. And I'm not just getting this from a parable. This is a passage that we read that I think is somewhat, I don't know, scary a little bit. But this is a passage that we read in Luke chapter 11. We read this. It says, once Jesus was in a certain place praying. As he finished, one of his disciples came to him and said, Lord, teach us to pray just as John taught his disciples. We learn two things from this. The first thing is that Jesus' disciples, the people who know Jesus, the people who walk with Jesus, the people who learn from Jesus directly, the people that Jesus is grooming to take over the job, he's going to hand the baton off. They were concerned about the way that they might pray, to the degree that they asked Jesus, would you please teach us? Which tells us that it's something that can be taught, and it's something that we should want to be taught. But it's also not even just Jesus. The thing about it is this is such a universal thing that they don't even come up with the idea on their own. They say, just like John, that's John the Baptist. John the Baptist is teaching his disciples to pray. So why aren't you teaching your disciples to pray? Says the disciple of Jesus. And you might notice I did cut off the passage because we're not talking about that yet. But I'll just spoiler alert for a sermon in this series. Jesus doesn't just say, nah, you're fine. Just pray how you want. That's not what Jesus says. Jesus says, cool, I'll teach you. And then he gives them a prayer, he tells them how to pray. Here's the point, okay? I say this a lot. And this is not new if you guys have been around for a while, and I'm sorry you have to hear it again, but I've struggled with the concept of prayer my entire life as a Christian. I have 10,000 questions about it. I don't quite understand what's going on. I think sometimes it sounds silly. Sometimes it seems blasphemous almost. Like, I just have 1,000 questions, and we don't need to go into them specifically, but I mean, we might in some of this. But for example, if I'm supposed to pray for God's will in my life, why not just not pray and just let God's will happen? If I can pray wrongly, why not just not pray so I don't pray wrong? If I can pray for a dumb thing and ask God for a dumb thing, well, I can't be trusted, so why should I do that at all? Why go through these motions, right? I just have a million questions, how this all works. Why do some prayers get answered and some prayers don't? I mean, just a million things. And if the answer is, well, it's not part of God's will, why are we praying at all? I could sit here and just say I don't like prayer for the next 6 hours. But turns out I am a preacher and I'm supposed to talk about it. So every now and then I make another run at it. So here we are. We're in the first week of our series called Pray Better Prayers. And what I want to do is this. If we're supposed to learn how to pray from Jesus, then we should do that. We shouldn't just say, it's fine, do whatever. Whatever comes out of your heart is fine. As long as you're sincere. We have all these platitudes. Instead, maybe we should just learn how to pray from Jesus. And luckily we have, not just the disciples have Jesus just hanging out with him, and that's great, but we have the entirety of the scriptures to draw from, to say, okay, what is a prayer that we should pray and what is not a prayer that we should not pray, and how should we be approaching this? And this morning we should just start with the obvious. I brought up the one that the parable teaches us the concept that there are good prayers, there are bad prayers. So let's just ask the question: what made the prayer of that Pharisee in that story bad? What actually made it bad? And you might think, well, that's a stupid question, Drew. But let me include this. The way the story is told, we are supposed to assume that the prayer is not good, and yet it is completely based on truth. It is completely accurate theologically. The Pharisee was a good person who did do good things, who did not do bad things. He was not wrong in a single thing he said. So why was it a bad prayer? We're going to answer that. But to do so, we should talk about a different prayer. Let's talk about a woman by the name of Hannah. Hannah lived about 1,000 years or so. A little more than 1,000 years. Let's call it 1,000 years. It's a nice round number. But 1,000 years before Jesus did. And Hannah was, by all accounts, an extremely normal, ordinary woman. She lived an incredibly normal, ordinary life as somebody from Israel, as somebody who was married. Her husband's named Elkanah, and they just except for a problem. You see, Hannah was unable to have children. And that, of course, is a problem in every generation, but it is particularly a problem 1,000 years before the birth of Christ. Now, this is a touchy issue. I understand. I get it. Sometimes men like to weigh in on women having children. And those moments don't go well. Ever. So if I say something that sounds like, is Drew being totally sensitive there? I don't know. He's trying. If you could give me the grace to tell this story without exactly, I'm not a woman. But here's the problem with Hannah not being able to have children. In her culture, in the world she lived in, all she was really expected to do was have children. That's it. Like, that's her whole function. Part of this is like, I don't know, evolution. Like, if you don't have kids, the species doesn't propagate. I feel like every now and then we forget that part of it. But like, you do actually need to have some kids or else like the world dies off, and that's bad. That's bad, right? We should have humans on the earth. But more to the point, the Bible tells us that children are a blessing from God. And therefore, if you have children, I know you may not always feel this way. I know. But if you have children, God has blessed you with those children. It is a gift from God to you. It is a trust from God. I mean, think about this. God loves people. Every person is made in God's image. For God to trust you to raise 1 or 2 or 5 or 10 of them is such a responsibility that God trusts you with. He's saying to you, hey, I believe in you so much, I'm going to give this tiny person who cannot feed him or herself to you. Without you, this child will die. But I trust that you will be enough like me to raise this child, not only to allow them to survive, but to become like whole people. Man, what an incredible gift from God. Everything I just said is true. There's nothing that's like not universally theologically accurate about what I just said. But here's the problem. What people a lot of the times do is they take a true statement and they say, well, if that's true, then this must be true. And the back end is not often true. And so here's kind of what it means. When we're told it's a blessing to have children, what people do with that is say, okay, well, if you don't have children, you must not be blessed. This is, of course, not how presents work. It's not. Think about Christmas, right? Like if somebody doesn't give you a present at Christmas, that doesn't mean they don't love you or care about you or want you in their life. It just means that like Christmas is expensive and they you're hard to shop for. Some people are hard to shop for. Did that sound too pointed? I'm so sorry. But see, that's not how presents work, right? Like, if I give one person a present and I don't give it to somebody else, that doesn't mean that, like, I don't love everybody, these two people, right? Like, that's not what that means. It just means sometimes I give this person a present. Not like if I see something that like just like I look, I have friends that like it's like, oh, I saw this dumb little thing and like that guy really likes this dumb little thing. I should get it and send it to him. Amazon's great with that. Just put their address in and there you go. I do that with some of my friends. I don't do it with all my friends because a lot of my friends don't like dumb little stuff. Right? Like, this is just the way this works. We all understand that just because you didn't get a present, that does not mean that you're not in some sense blessed. In fact, it might mean, look, let's talk about hugs. There are some people that if you don't give them a hug, they're going to be like, why don't they love me? And those people are great. You should hug those people. And there are other people that if you hug them, you are actively harming them because they don't want to be touched. Stop touching them. See how that works? Like, God gives most people children, but God doesn't give everybody children. That doesn't mean that they're cursed or not blessed or not loved. But see, people think that way. It's a great mistake we make. But see, remember, the world's not all about us as individuals. It's not how this works. That's the part of the whole like not being self-centered thing. Like you shouldn't make it all about you and just say, well, I didn't get this, so it's about me. No, it's not about you. Stop. But that's not a thing they understood. So Hannah was seen as a failure who was not blessed by God. That's what her mom would have told her. That's what the girlfriends down at the well would have told her. You know, that's what everybody would have told her, and it certainly would have been what Elkanah's second wife told her. Yeah, I know, this sounds mean. But again, remember, if you don't have children, we all die. So it was very common in the ancient world. Like monogamy was the norm, largely because of money, because it's women to be expensive. And so, see, that's the part you got to give me a break on. Okay, I'm sorry, but it's true. And so, like, remember Solomon's got like 700 wives? That's because he had so much money, guys. So anyway, so monogamy kind of grows out of financial lack. And so you would have one wife because that's what you would do. But if your wife can't give you children, you can't send your line on down the road. You're not doing the stuff. And so you would get a second one. And you can afford that because you don't have a bunch of kids and a whole thing. So Elkanah got married to a woman named Peninnah, and you might be thinking, I don't know if I can remember Peninnah's name, but you can because her name it's almost panini. And everybody loves paninis. Except for Hannah. Hannah is a lettuce wrap girl. She doesn't eat paninis. This is how you could remember this. I'm so sorry. I'm sorry. It's a serious story, and I feel like I don't do well talking about serious stuff. So, compose ourselves again. So there's Hannah, and there's Panini, and there's these two wives. And here's the situation the Bible tells us, okay? This is so awkward, and I feel bad for everybody involved. And I mean that, literally everybody involved. Elkanah never wanted to marry Peninnah. Never wanted a second wife. He just wanted the one wife. That's all he wanted. He loved Hannah. Desperately loved Hannah. Desperately wanted to have a family with her. It didn't work out. So now he needs to have children. So he gets Peninnah as his second wife. And he says, okay, well, that. But everybody knows the score. Hannah knows she's the one that Elkanah loves. And Peninnah knows she's not. Like, I know the story tells us, and if you read the Bible, it's 1 Samuel 1, you should read it later. I know it says Peninnah was cruel to Hannah. She was, but also, like, you would be too. Let's be real honest about this. Hannah gets to live her whole life knowing she's never going to be a mother, which means she's a failure in the eyes of everyone. Peninnah gets to know that she lives her entire existence as someone else's backup plan. She's not loved by a husband. She's not cared for. She's just there to pump out kids. And so Peninnah doesn't like Hannah. Hannah doesn't like Peninnah. And Elkanah's like, oh my gosh, maybe I shouldn't have had kids at all. This is horrible. And for years, this is the awkward state. One roof. one household, the wife that Elkanah actually likes and is in love with, but can't give him children. The wife he doesn't like or care about at all, never wanted in the first place, but is giving him children. And it is awkward with everybody. I don't know how long it would take you to just break emotionally in the midst of this. But one day we read about Hannah breaking. Elkanah, there's a place called Shiloh, and it's where it's where everybody went to worship and offer sacrifice. It's not the temple, but it's before the temple. It's a tabernacle. It's where tabernacle was planted. They stuck it there. And so you would go and you would offer a sacrifice. You would go as often as you can. You go maybe, once a year, ideally, and you would go and you'd offer sacrifices. And Elkanah was devout. He was devoted to God. And so he would go, and one year Hannah said, "Hey, can I go with you?" And Elkanah is like, "Yeah, I would love that. That would be wonderful." And so the two of them go. And look, I'm not going to pretend like I understand how this works, but they go and do the sacrifice stuff, and they do all the stuff, and they have like an evening meal where everybody that's there to do a sacrifice, they all eat, and it's a good time. It sounds like a good time, man. It seems like an awesome time, but Hannah's not having a good time at all, because Hannah never has a good time. Like, what's a good day look like when you live with your husband's second wife, who's only there because you're so broken you couldn't do your job? What's a good day look like for you? And so everybody goes to sleep, and Hannah can't sleep. And so she goes back to the tabernacle. And she's there and she's praying. And it's interesting because she offers this prayer. And this is what that prayer looks like. It's in 1 Samuel chapter 1. It says, Hannah was in deep anguish, crying bitterly as she prayed to the Lord. And she made this vow: "O Lord of heaven's armies, if you would look upon my sorrow and answer my prayer and give me a son, then I'll give him back to you. He'll be yours for his entire lifetime, and as a sign that he has been dedicated to the Lord, his hair will never be cut." Now, that last part we should explain. About 1,000 years before the birth of Christ is when she lives. Also, about 1,000 years is still the time of the judges. Remember the story of Samson. This is like right after that. There was a group of people, the Nazarites. They would not cut their hair, and they would be devoted to God. And so what Hannah was saying to God is, look, if you bless me, then I will be a blessing to other people. I'll give my son back to you, and he'll serve only you and only your people and only your purposes. That is what she is saying. It's an interesting part of the story that I think it's almost completely unnecessary, but it gives some context. See, there's a guy named Eli, and he's in charge of the whole thing. Eli is the judge of Israel. Like I said, this is the time of the judges, and Eli is the judge over Israel right now. He took over for Samson. Samson died, and Eli is the judge. He's the second to last judge. That's foreshadowing. He's the second to last judge, and he's kind of in charge of the temple. And he sees this woman, praying. But it says Hannah was in deep anguish, crying bitterly. She was a wreck. Just years of emotion. She's just laying out before God. She's kept it in because, nobody else understands. Nobody else cares. What's she supposed to do? Cry like, "Oh, I can't have kids." Cool, you're cursed. Like, she doesn't want to bring it up to anybody. And so Eli sees this woman, and he immediately is like, "Oh my goodness, that woman is a wreck. I bet she's been drinking." He looks at this woman, and he's like, "She is such a mess. Nobody who is sober looks like that. That's how bad things were for Hannah. So Eli goes over and he's like, I guess I gotta go with the drunk chick. Hey, what are you doing? And that's when he realizes she's not drunk. She's just upset, and she just tells him. And she tells him what she was praying, and Eli, maybe for the first time that her entire life since this has happened. I love Eli in this story because Eli is just nice to her, and he just tells her, you know what? Like, that's a great prayer. I hope you get it. Like, Eli's nice. He doesn't, like, Elkanah's nice, but, like, nobody else is nice to Hannah, and here's Eli who's just nice. It's a good lesson for all of us. It's somewhat immaterial, the sermon. Look, this story would be really bad if it was like, then Hannah went home and she was barren forever. It's not a good story if that's how it is. And Hannah goes home and she gets pregnant. And she's true to her word. She ends up raising a son who's devoted to God. And her son ends up being a man by the name of Samuel, as of 1st and 2nd Samuel. This is the origin story for Samuel. Samuel's fun because Samuel has this great distinction like nobody else has. He is a judge. He's the last judge. He's the last judge of Israel. He's a prophet, and he's a priest all at once. He does all those jobs. And he ends up bringing in, like Samuel's the guy who ends up, like with David and everything. Like, it's all good. Everything, it's all good. But it starts with Hannah and her horrible backstory, right? It might sound obvious why Hannah's prayer is good. It might. But I think it's really important that we don't just say, okay, it's obvious and move on. I think it's really important that we put ourselves in this woman's shoes and ask a simple question. Why would Hannah have wanted to have a child? Well, there's the obvious one, probably because she wants to stick it in Panini's face. I mean, absolutely. Probably second on that list would be to stick it in her mom's face. Her mom is not mentioned, but I just know that her mom was like right there. Then to stick it in everybody else. There's a lot of sticking in faces is the point. And look, if you're going to tell me that wouldn't be your first motivation, I think you're a liar. Like, that's just, if you've been humiliated for years, you just want to show people, see? I think maybe second most of that is simply the idea of the way she sees herself. If you look in the mirror every single day and you see a failure, that's not fun. If you look in the mirror every single day and you see somebody who's disappointing everybody around you, equally not fun. If you go to bed every single night and say, what am I even here for? Like, what's the point? This woman had some insecurity that she had earned. Sometimes we don't earn. There's nothing more annoying than like a beautiful woman being like, oh, I'm not pretty today. Guys, that's vanity. That's not insecurity. But like, there's some real insecurity that happens, right? Where we truly feel like just horrible things about ourselves. And sometimes we earn those things. Not us. Hannah had earned the insecurity. She was barren. She couldn't have children. Her husband had taken a second wife. And so, man, having a kid would go a long way to fixing a lot of that. You probably also should see a counselor, but, therapy's good. There's also just the fact that she wants to be a mom, right? Like, that motherhood is great, right, moms? Such a delight. Aren't they your world? I'm so sorry. I just feel like, and I'm going to get in trouble for this. I'm saying it anyway. I just feel like people, like, there's these moms that endlessly complain about their kids all the time on social media. And then, like, every now and then it's like, my children are my world. It's like, man, you just spent the last 3 months complaining about them. maybe settle down with all that. I know, I'm not a mom. I don't understand. I get it. Whatever. Where was I at? There's a lot of reasons why Hannah would not have a child. And yet she prayed to have a child to be a blessing to other people. She wanted God to bless her so that she could bless others. That's what made it a good prayer. Her prayer was not about herself. It was not about her insecurity. It was not about sticking it to anyone. It was not even about the primal, ingrained evolutionary need to propagate the species. It was simply, God, if you would bless me, I will give that blessing right back to be a blessing to others. And she meant it because she gave us Samuel. That's why that was a good prayer. Because it was a prayer of selfless giving to others. It was a prayer not for herself, but for other people. Now, let's look at the Pharisee in the story. We didn't actually read it. Let's actually read it. This is what we read in Luke chapter 18. Jesus says in this story. It says, the Pharisee stood by himself and prayed this prayer. I thank you, God, that I am not like other people. Cheaters, sinners, adulterers. I am certainly not like that tax collector. I fast twice a week and I give you 1/10 of my income. I don't doubt that that's true. Jesus doesn't want us to doubt that that's true, right? Like Jesus doesn't say, oh, and by the way, he was lying. Like, no, he probably, that's it. That's the truth. He was right and he was righteous, but his prayer wasn't listened to by God because, quite simply, it was selfish. It was about him. This is one of the hardest lessons we can learn. Even if we're right, if we're selfish, we're not right. I'm going to say that again. It's not the point, but it's kind of the point. Even if we're right, if we're being selfish, we're not right anymore. The selfishness cancels it out. If what we're doing is for our benefit only, it doesn't matter how righteous, holy, or theologically correct we are. You see, that's the problem we have as Christians so often is we're selfish. We're like, yeah, but we have the truth. Cool, you're still selfish. It's not like, well, if I'm right, it means I get to be selfish. You know who was more right than anybody else? Jesus. You know who was less selfish than anybody else? Also Jesus. It's our first week. We're going to do 8 of these, okay? It's 2 full months of this. And you guys are like, oh my gosh, Drew, I know. It's a long journey. We're going to talk a lot about different prayers, and we're going to talk a lot about stuff. I'm hopeful we don't just learn something in prayer. I'm hopeful we learn stuff about ourselves and God and everything else, right? But this had to go first. We had to start here. Because at no point as we talk about prayer will this point not be true. This is sort of the key to unlocking so many ideas. And so everything is going to be built on this idea of what we're trying to be. Our first lesson for how to pray better prayers is this. A good prayer seeks God's blessings for selfless reasons, and a bad prayer does not. A good prayer seeks God's blessings for selfless reasons, but a bad prayer does not. We're going to pick up next week. But we have to understand, God does bless us, and we are called to pray. But we also need to understand, it's never going to be a good prayer when that prayer is just about us. So we offer an invitation each and every week. We're going to sing a song, the musician to come forward. If you want to get baptized, you should. That's that. I don't want to run over on time. Get baptized if you haven't been baptized. Let's talk. If you want to join the church, just tell me. We'll do it. High five. Cool. But see, the goal of all of our prayers is the goal of all of our faith. Is to stop thinking about ourselves. Is to get out of our own headspace. And that, quite frankly, is why I love the story of Hannah so much. Because she had a big headspace to hang out in. You probably don't have a worse life than Hannah. If she can be selfless, I think we can find the space too as well. That's not a good way to end a sermon, but we're ending it that way. Done. Let's sing a song. Jamie, Stephanie, what are we doing here? Let's sing a song here. Here we go.